The room buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of eyes watched as the world's most famous entrepreneur, Elon Musk, sat on stage at a live conference, answering questions from the audience. Cameras clicked, lights flickered, and microphones captured every word as Elon discussed everything from space exploration to artificial intelligence. But amidst all the high-tech discussions and groundbreaking innovations, no one expected what was about to happen. Mr. Musk, a small, tentative voice called out from the front row. The audience hushed, all eyes turning to the young girl who had just spoken. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her blonde hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a bright yellow dress, almost glowing under the stage lights. She raised her hand again, clearly nervous but determined. "Yes?" Elon Musk said, adjusting his position in the chair and smiling. He was always known for his calm and collected demeanor, but something in the little girl's eyes made him pause. I have a question," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper, but loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I've been wondering, what do you think about God? Does he exist?" The room fell silent. A hushed murmur passed through the crowd as all eyes focused on Elon. For a moment, Elon stared at the girl, his brow furrowed in thought. He hadn't prepared for this kind of question. He was a man of logic and science, not someone who often discussed matters of faith. His mind raced. How could he respond? He had built rockets, connected people through technology, and revolutionized industries. But now, here was a child asking a question that had puzzled humanity for centuries. A question that was personal. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. The voice over the speakers cut through his thoughts, but it did little to ease the tension in the air. The world was watching, and the pressure was mounting. Emily's eyes were wide with anticipation, her small hands nervously twisting in her lap as she waited for an answer. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. Elon sat up straighter, searching for the right words. The logical answer, the scientific one, was easy. The universe, the laws of physics, he could explain it all. But Emily wasn't asking for a lecture on the stars or the equations that govern life. She was asking for something deeper, something that science couldn't answer. She was asking about meaning. I don't know," Elon finally said, his voice softer than usual. It wasn't what anyone expected. "I'm not sure how to answer that. It's a very big question, but I think maybe we should all try to be kind to each other. That's something we can do, no matter what." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She blinked, her little face wrinkling as she tried to hold them back. It wasn't the answer she was looking for. The tension in the room was palpable. Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized space travel and technology, had just answered a question about God with a simple, honest admission. "I don't know." And yet, somehow, in that moment, his answer was the most human thing he could have said. The audience waited for more, expecting some grand revelation, but instead, there was only silence. Emily looked down at her lap, fighting to keep the tears at bay. Her father, sitting beside her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He didn't know what to say either, but in that moment, the world seemed to understand that some questions were bigger than any one person could answer. "Is that okay?" Elon asked gently, looking directly at Emily. "Sometimes, we don't have all the answers, but that's part of being human. We ask questions, we search, and we keep looking for meaning in everything we do." Emily nodded slowly, though her tears still shimmered. She didn't fully understand, but she could feel that something important was happening, something bigger than her. As the moment passed, Elon shifted back into his usual composed self, but the question lingered in the air. The audience, still in awe, was left to process what had just happened. It wasn't just a question about God. It was a question about the very essence of humanity and how even the brightest minds like Elon Musk didn't always have the answers. In the weeks to come, Emily's question would continue to echo, sparking conversations and debates across the world. And though she had not received the answer she hoped for, Emily had unknowingly set into motion a journey that would change more than just her own life. Emily sat quietly in the back seat of her father's car as they drove home from the conference. The bright city lights blinked past her window, but her mind was far away. Her father, John, glanced at her occasionally as they navigated through the evening traffic. He knew something had changed during the event, but he wasn't sure how to help her process it. Emily had always been a curious child. From the moment she could speak, she asked questions, endless questions about the world around her. As a toddler, she was constantly in motion, always looking for something new to discover. But somewhere along the way, her world had shifted. When Emily was only 5 years old, her mother, Claire, passed away after a long battle with cancer. It had been a sudden and heartbreaking change. Claire had been everything to Emily, her protector, her teacher, her best friend. After the funeral, Emily had retreated into herself. She became quieter, more reserved. It wasn't that she didn't feel the love from her father. She did. But without her mother, something vital in Emily's heart felt incomplete. John, a kind but busy man, tried his best to support his daughter, but the weight of his own grief made it difficult to always know how to help her. They spent their days together, but often, Emily seemed lost in her own thoughts. She began asking questions that John wasn't sure how to answer, questions about where her mother had gone, whether she would ever see her again, and, most poignantly, questions about God. John was a practical man, someone who believed in the importance of science, logic, and hard facts. He never felt much need for religion in his life. But Emily was different. Her mind worked in ways that sometimes left him feeling like he was struggling to keep up. When she began asking about God, John didn't know where to turn. "Is God real, Dad?" Emily had asked one night, her small voice trembling as she sat beside him on the couch. If he made everything, why did he take Mom away? The question had broken his heart, but he hadn't known how to answer. He told her that sometimes bad things happen and that it was okay to ask questions. But deep inside, he wondered if he was giving her enough to help her cope. That's when he decided to take her to the conference to see Elon Musk. Emily had become fascinated by Elon over the past year. His work in space exploration, electric cars, and even artificial intelligence had caught her attention. She admired his boldness, his desire to change the world. But more than anything, she loved the idea that Elon was always asking big questions. Questions that seemed as though they might one day have the answers that Emily herself was searching for. As they pulled into their driveway, Emily didn't say a word. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap, her head leaning against the window as if she were deep in thought. John could sense that the question she'd asked Elon during the interview had opened something inside her. It had been a heavy, vulnerable moment, and Emily wasn't the type of girl to easily forget things like that. "Hey, Em," John said gently, turning off the engine. "How are you feeling? Do you want to talk about it?" Emily didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the driveway in front of them, watching the headlights illuminate the path to their front door. After a few moments, she sighed deeply, her voice quiet. "Dad, I don't think Elon knows the answer either," she said softly. John's heart sank. He had hoped that seeing someone like Elon, someone so successful, so sure of himself, would help Emily find some clarity, some sense of comfort. But it seemed that the very thing that had made the moment so special had left Emily more uncertain than before. "I know, sweetie," John replied, turning in his seat to face her. "I think maybe he doesn't have all the answers. But maybe that's okay." Emily nodded slowly, but John could tell she wasn't fully convinced. She still had the same yearning in her eyes, the same hunger for meaning that had been there since her mother's passing. "Do you think we'll ever get an answer?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, about God, and why things happen?" John reached over and gently took her hand, feeling the coolness of her fingers as they intertwined. "I don't know, Em, but I think sometimes it's not about having the answer. Sometimes, it's about asking the question and learning as we go. And maybe, just maybe, we don't need to have all the answers right now." Emily didn't say anything after that. She just sat there, staring at the stars twinkling in the sky. Her mind was racing, but her heart was still heavy. She couldn't help but wonder if there was something more, something that had eluded her since her mother's death. Maybe, one day, she would find the answer to her question. But for now, she was just waiting. The days following the conference were filled with an odd mix of silence and uncertainty. Emily's mind seemed to be swirling with the weight of her question. Her curiosity about God, the universe, and her own place in the world was growing stronger, but she still didn't know where to turn for answers. She had asked Elon Musk, and he had admitted that he didn't have all the answers either. That realization left her with a strange emptiness, as if something important was just out of her reach. At school, Emily struggled to focus on the lessons. Her teachers noticed her distraction, and even her friends seemed to sense her internal turmoil. The other children talked about their weekend plans, their favorite shows, and their new toys, but Emily couldn't bring herself to care. How could she, when there were so many bigger questions rattling around in her mind? One afternoon, while sitting in the classroom, Emily stared out the window. The autumn leaves were falling from the trees, swirling in the wind like tiny dancers. Her thoughts drifted again to that moment with Elon, to his words that had meant well but hadn't provided the clarity she longed for. She had always been a deep thinker, but now the weight of her thoughts felt heavier than ever. Was there more to life than what she saw in front of her? Was there something beyond the stars that Elon was trying to explain? Was there a greater purpose to everything? As the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emily packed up her things slowly. Her teacher, Mrs. Turner, noticed the change in her. "Emily, are you all right?" Mrs. Turner asked, her voice gentle. "You've been a little quieter than usual today." Emily hesitated, her pencil hovering over her notebook, unsure of how to explain the thoughts swirling in her head. Finally, she looked up at Mrs. Turner and asked softly, "Do you think it's okay to not know everything?" Mrs. Turner paused. It wasn't the usual question she got from Emily. Usually, it was about a math problem or a science experiment. But this was different. Mrs. Turner smiled warmly. "I think it's perfectly fine not to know everything," she said. "In fact, sometimes not knowing can lead to the best discoveries. It's okay to ask big questions and to be unsure. The important thing is that you keep searching, keep wondering." Emily's eyes widened, her thoughts racing. But what if the answers never come? What if we're just lost? Mrs. Turner leaned down, her voice soft. "You won't be lost, Emily. You'll always have the people around you who care. And sometimes, that's the answer we need." That evening, after dinner, Emily sat on the couch with her father. John was flipping through the news on his tablet, but his mind was elsewhere. He had noticed how quiet Emily had become since the conference. He knew she had asked Elon Musk a question that was bothering her, and he wondered if the answer had been enough to ease her mind. "Hey, Em," he said, breaking the silence. "Do you want to talk about what happened at the conference? You seemed like you were thinking a lot about it after." Emily sighed and set her book down, looking at her father. She didn't want to disappoint him, but the truth was, she didn't feel like talking. Not really. The words just didn't seem to explain what was in her heart. Instead, she simply shook her head. I don't know, Dad," she murmured. "It's like, I thought I would get an answer, but I didn't. And now, I feel even more lost." John looked at her, concern in his eyes. He understood that Emily was struggling, but he wasn't sure how to help her. He had always been a man of reason, but this was different. This was a question that didn't have a clear, logical answer. "You know, Emily," John began slowly, "sometimes, the answers we're looking for aren't as clear as we want them to be. But that doesn't mean they're not out there. Sometimes, it takes time to find them. But what if they're never found?" Emily's voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear that had been building inside her. John took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Well, maybe we don't always find the answers we expect. But that doesn't mean we stop searching. It just means that the journey, the questions themselves, are important too." Emily looked at her father, not sure if she understood entirely, but something in his words made her feel a little better. Maybe it wasn't about having all the answers right away. Maybe it was about the search itself, the curiosity, the wondering, the journey. But just as Emily began to feel a bit of peace, a thought crept into her mind. What if she was the only one asking these questions? What if no one else was struggling with the same doubts she was? It was the kind of thought that sent a shiver down her spine. The isolation of not having answers, of feeling like she was searching in the dark, seemed unbearable at times. And it was this thought, the thought that she might be alone in her search, that would drive Emily to ask even more questions. She wasn't content with just a half answer anymore. She wanted to understand. And if no one else had the answers, she would find them herself. The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of resolve. She couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to find the answers, no matter how big or small. The question that had been gnawing at her for weeks, the question about God, about the universe, about why everything happened the way it did, was still there. It was like a puzzle she couldn't solve. But now, more than ever, she felt a need to piece it together. As she got dressed for school, she found herself staring at the picture of her mother that sat on her nightstand. It had been taken during a family trip to the beach, just a few months before her mom got sick. Claire was smiling, holding Emily in her arms, both of them bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. It was a beautiful moment, but it also brought an ache to Emily's heart. She missed her so much. The questions about God, about the meaning of life, they felt even more intense without her mother's presence. "Mom, where are you?" Emily whispered softly, as if the question could somehow reach her mother wherever she was. She shook her head and tried to push the sadness away. Today, she was determined to do something. She wasn't going to wait for answers to just appear. Emily needed to take control of her search. After breakfast, Emily went to school with a quiet determination. Her mind was set. She wasn't just going to think about her questions anymore. She was going to take action. During the school day, she approached her friends, asking them what they thought about God and life's bigger questions. Some of them laughed, shrugged it off, or said they didn't think about it too much. A few seemed genuinely confused when she brought up the topic, but there was one girl in particular, Lily, who seemed intrigued. Lily was a bit of an outsider, like Emily. She had grown up in a family that practiced religion, but wasn't as strict about it as some of the other kids at school. She often spent her lunch breaks reading or drawing in her notebook. When Emily asked her opinion on God, Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. I think I believe in something," Lily said, her voice soft but certain. "I don't know if it's exactly God, or if it's just something out there. But when my grandmother passed away, I felt like she was still with me in some way. Not like a ghost, but like a feeling, you know?" Emily's eyes widened. "So, you think she's still around?" Lily nodded. "Maybe. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, I know she's gone, but I still feel connected to her. Like she's in my heart." The idea intrigued Emily. Was that what she was missing? Some kind of connection? Was that the answer? That the people we loved didn't just disappear. They lived on in some way? That night, after dinner, Emily went into her father's study. John was sitting at his desk, working on his tablet. The glow of the screen cast shadows over his face, making him look older, more tired than usual. Emily hesitated for a moment before walking up to him. "Dad," she said, her voice serious. "Do you think Grandma is still around, even though she's dead?" John looked up, surprised by the question. He sat back in his chair, looking at her carefully. He knew this question was different from the usual one she asked. This wasn't about homework or school. It was about something bigger, something more personal. "Emily," he paused, thinking carefully before answering, "I think people we love, whether they're alive or gone, stay with us in different ways. It's not about them being physically here, but more about the impact they have on us. The love they give us, the lessons they teach us, they stay with us. Maybe not in the way we expect, but in the way we remember them." Emily nodded, her mind working through his words. It wasn't the answer she had been hoping for, but it was something. It was a start. It gave her a sense of connection, a sense that maybe, just maybe, her mother was still with her in some way. But there was still more to discover. There was still the question about God, about the bigger meaning behind everything. Emily couldn't let go of that. The next day, Emily made a decision. After school, instead of going straight home, she would visit the local church. She had heard some of her classmates talk about it, and though she wasn't sure what to expect, she felt compelled to go. Maybe, she thought, she could find something there. Some clue, some answer, or at least a new perspective. That afternoon, Emily walked to the church with a sense of anticipation mixed with nervousness. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but something told her that it might help her find peace. The church was quiet when she entered. The soft light from the stained glass windows bathed the room in a gentle glow. There was a sense of stillness in the air, and Emily felt both small and comforted at the same time. She wandered through the pews, her fingers lightly grazing the back of a bench as she moved toward the altar. She sat down in one of the pews, her mind racing. Should she pray? Was that what she was supposed to do here? She didn't know. But the feeling of the place, the calmness, the reverence, was different from anything she had felt before. As she sat there, Emily closed her eyes and whispered softly, "God, if you're out there, please help me understand. I need to know if you're real and if I'll ever see Mom again." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Emily waited, her heart pounding in her chest. But nothing came. No answer. No voice. No sign. For a moment, she felt the familiar ache of doubt creep back in. Was she really alone in this search? Was there anyone out there listening? And then, something unexpected happened. As Emily sat there, lost in her thoughts, she noticed a small piece of paper tucked into the corner of the pew in front of her. It looked like a pamphlet. She reached forward and pulled it out. The cover read, "The Meaning of Life, Finding Peace in the Search." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Could this be what she was looking for? Was this some kind of sign? The pamphlet in Emily's hands felt surprisingly light, almost delicate, as she studied the cover. It seemed like such a small thing, but it was enough to make her heart race. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the first few lines. Life is full of questions, and it's okay not to have all the answers. The search for meaning is a journey, not a destination. The words spoke to her instantly, echoing the very feelings that had been bubbling inside her for so long. She felt a mix of curiosity and hope. Was this pamphlet really going to help her understand what she'd been searching for? She couldn't help but feel like it was no coincidence that she had found it. Sitting there in the church, with the soft light filtering through the stained glass windows, Emily began reading more intently. In every life, there is a point where we ask ourselves, what is the purpose of all this? Is there a greater meaning to the challenges we face? These questions are not just ours. They are as old as time itself. And the answer, though it may not always come clearly, lies in how we choose to search, to ask, and to grow. The words seemed to offer a new perspective. Maybe Emily had been too focused on finding a concrete answer, a single moment of clarity that would explain everything. But what if the answer wasn't a final destination? What if it was a continual process, a way of living and growing in the search itself? Emily kept reading, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. The key to understanding the mysteries of life is not just in receiving answers, but in embracing the journey. Trust that the right answers will come when you are ready to hear them. And in the meantime, hold close to the love and connections you already have, for they are the foundation of all meaning. Emily took a deep breath, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or was it relief? Either way, she felt like she had been given a tiny piece of a much larger puzzle, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like it was okay not to have all the answers right away. She closed the pamphlet and held it against her chest for a moment, feeling a strange peace settle in her. Maybe her questions didn't need immediate answers. Maybe, just maybe, the search itself was part of the meaning. As she left the church and walked home that evening, her steps felt lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't entirely sure what the pamphlet meant or how it would help her, but she knew it had sparked something inside her. A new way of thinking. A new perspective. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel alone in her questions. When she got home, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes soft with concern. "How was your day, Em? Did you find what you were looking for?" Emily smiled, though it wasn't a full smile. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement of a new understanding that was still unfolding. "I think I found something," she said, sitting down across from him. "It's not the answer, not yet, but it's a start. I think maybe the answers come when we're ready to hear them, and it's okay not to have everything figured out right away." John raised an eyebrow, clearly interested. "What makes you think that?" Emily placed the pamphlet on the table in front of him. "I found this at the church. It's about the search for meaning, not just the answers, but the journey itself. It says the key to understanding life is in the questions and the connections we make along the way. John read the pamphlet in silence, his brow furrowed in thought. He didn't believe in many things that couldn't be proven by science, but he was always willing to listen to Emily. She had a way of seeing the world that he couldn't always understand, but it made him want to be open, to be there for her as she found her own path. "Well," he said after a moment, looking up from the pamphlet, "I'm glad you found something that makes you feel better. Sometimes, life doesn't give us all the answers right away. But it's good to know that you're thinking about it. Just keep asking, keep searching, and you'll find what you need." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude toward her father. He might not have all the answers, but he always supported her in her search for them, and that meant the world to her. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about the pamphlet and everything it had said. She wasn't sure if she fully understood all of it, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't giving up. The search was still on. Her heart felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't as afraid of the unknown. The answers might take time, but she felt a new sense of peace. She didn't have to rush. She just had to keep asking the questions, keep learning, and trust that she would find what she needed when the time was right. As Emily drifted off to sleep that night, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe the greatest answer of all is learning how to embrace the journey, even when it's unclear. The following week felt different for Emily. There was still a yearning deep inside her to understand the mysteries of life, but something had shifted. The pamphlet she had found at the church had given her a sense of clarity that she hadn't had before. It wasn't an answer to her question about God, but it had offered her something almost as important: permission to keep searching. For the first time in ages, Emily wasn't frustrated by the unknown. Instead, she began to find comfort in it. She started paying attention to the small things, moments of connection, small acts of kindness, the way the world seemed to move in rhythms she hadn't noticed before. The search was becoming less about finding the right answer and more about allowing herself to grow through the questions. It was as if the journey itself was a path to something more, something deeper. One afternoon, Emily decided to talk to Lily again. They hadn't spoken much since their conversation about God and the search for meaning, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about what Lily had said, how she felt that her grandmother's love was still with her even after she had passed. It had struck Emily, and now she felt compelled to ask more. At lunch, Emily found Lily sitting alone in the schoolyard, sketching in her notebook, as usual. Emily sat down next to her, her curiosity piqued. "Hey, Lily," Emily began, her voice tentative but eager. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about your grandma and how you felt she was still with you. Do you really believe that?" Lily looked up, her eyes thoughtful. She closed her notebook and set it down beside her. "Yeah, I do," she said quietly. "I know she's not physically here anymore, but I feel like I carry her with me. The things she taught me, the love she gave me, they're a part of me. And I think that's what keeps her close." Emily listened intently. "But how do you know? Like, how do you know it's not just you wishing she was still here?" Lily took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can explain it, but sometimes, when I'm sad or when I need advice, I feel like I can almost hear her voice in my head. It's not like a real voice, but it's like she's telling me what she would have said. And that makes me feel like she's still around, even if she's not here in the way I can see." Emily nodded, processing the words carefully. "That sounds comforting. I think I understand what you mean, even if I'm not sure about it yet. But I guess that's okay, right? It's okay to not have all the answers." Lily smiled softly. "Yeah, it's okay. Sometimes, the answers don't come right away. And sometimes, they come in ways we don't expect. But as long as we're open to them, that's all that matters." Emily sat back, the weight of those words sinking in. What if, just like Lily said, the answers didn't come in a way she could easily understand? What if the key wasn't about finding a simple, clear-cut answer, but about opening herself to the possibility that the answer might look different than she imagined? That afternoon, Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to her conversation with Lily. It was like a seed had been planted inside her, and it was slowly starting to sprout. What if the love she had lost in her mother wasn't gone forever? What if it was still with her in a different way? The idea felt both comforting and unsettling, like a distant memory waiting to be rediscovered. As the days passed, Emily's perspective on life began to shift. She started paying more attention to the world around her, noticing the beauty in the little things. She would see the way the sunlight danced through the trees, the way the flowers bloomed in unexpected places, and the way people smiled at each other, even on their hardest days. She found herself thinking about how her mother had always loved nature, how she had spoken about finding beauty in the simplest moments. It was as if Emily could still feel her presence in the world, even if she couldn't see her. One evening, as Emily was walking home from school, she saw something that took her breath away. The sky was a deep, vibrant pink, the colors bleeding into each other like a painting. She stopped in her tracks, gazing at the sky in awe. The light was so beautiful, so full of life. It made her feel connected to something bigger than herself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, taking a picture of the sky. She sent the picture to her dad with a short message. "Look at this, Dad. It's like Mom is still here in the sky." A few minutes later, her father texted back, "It's beautiful, Em. Maybe she is." The simplicity of his response made Emily smile. Maybe her father didn't have all the answers either, but he was willing to believe with her. And that, she realized, was enough. As Emily lay in bed that night, she thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. She still didn't have all the answers about God or about life, but something had changed. She wasn't as scared of the unknown anymore. She was beginning to understand that it wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey, the questions, the searching, the small moments of clarity and connection. They all added up to something beautiful. In the stillness of the night, Emily closed her eyes and whispered softly, "I don't have all the answers yet, but I think I'm starting to understand." And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace with that. The days turned into weeks, and Emily felt a sense of calm settling into her life that she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as though a new chapter had opened up, one where she was more at peace with the uncertainty of her questions. She was still searching, still yearning for deeper understanding, but the weight of her search had shifted. It no longer felt like an exhausting chase for answers. It had become a journey of discovery, small pieces at a time. One Friday afternoon, as the school bell rang signaling the end of the day, Emily was walking out of the building when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see her best friend, Sam, hurrying toward her. Sam had always been the adventurous type, always looking for new challenges or fun things to try. But today, something about him seemed different, more serious. "Hey, Em, can we talk for a second?" Sam asked, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Of course," Emily said, her curiosity piqued. She noticed that Sam's usual carefree energy was replaced with a sort of hesitance. They walked over to a bench outside the school, and Sam sat down first. He was quiet for a moment, staring at the ground before looking up at her. "Something's been on my mind lately," Sam began. "I don't know if I've ever really told you this, but I've been struggling with my own questions about life. About God, really." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was Sam about to share something that could help her with her own journey? She sat down beside him, ready to listen. "I've always kind of pushed these questions away," Sam continued, "but recently, it feels like they're just getting louder. Like, what if none of this means anything? What if everything we do just doesn't matter?" Emily's eyes softened with empathy. She had wondered those same things, but hearing Sam express them made her realize that she wasn't alone in this. She didn't know what to say, but she reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "I know what you mean," Emily said quietly. "I've had those moments too, wondering if anything really matters, if there's a bigger purpose behind all of this. But lately, I've started to think maybe the answers aren't as important as we think." Sam looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Well, I think it's not about getting all the answers right now. It's about allowing ourselves to keep searching, to keep asking questions. And I think there's meaning in that, in the search and in the way we live. It's like, maybe we don't need to know everything, but we can still find purpose in the connections we make, in the love we give and receive." Sam was quiet for a long time, processing her words. Emily wasn't sure if he fully understood, but she could see the gears turning in his mind. After a long pause, he spoke again. this time his voice lighter. Maybe you're right, he said slowly. Maybe it's okay not to know everything. Maybe it's enough to just keep moving forward and see where things go. Emily smiled softly. Exactly. We don't have to have it all figured out right away. We're not alone in this, and the people we care about are part of the answer. Maybe it's not all about the big cosmic questions. Maybe it's about the small, everyday moments where we find meaning. Sam nodded, his expression a little less burdened now. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Em. As Emily walked home that afternoon, she reflected on her conversation with Sam. It had struck her how much he, too, was searching for something. Looking for meaning in a world that often seemed confusing and chaotic. They were both on their own journeys, but somehow, talking it out together had made her feel less isolated. Later that evening, as Emily was sitting in her room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. Hey, Em. I've been thinking about our chat the other day, and I found something I think you might like. It's a book I've been reading. It's about the search for meaning and how different people from all over the world find their purpose. I thought it might be something to help you on your journey. Emily's heart lifted. The idea of finding something new, something that could offer more insight into the questions she had been carrying, felt exciting. She quickly texted back. That sounds amazing, Lily. I'd love to check it out. Thank you so much for thinking of me. It was the kind of small, unexpected moment that made her realize how interconnected their searches were. Lily was out there, looking for answers too, and now they were sharing their discoveries. Emily wasn't walking this path alone. There were others on the same journey, just like Sam, just like Lily, and even her father. Together, they were finding their way, one step at a time. That night, Emily sat at her desk, flipping through the pages of the book Lily had recommended. It wasn't an answer to everything, but as she read, she felt something stirring inside her. The stories of people from different walks of life, each of them searching for their own version of meaning, helped her feel a deeper connection to the world. And then, as she read one particular passage, it all clicked. The passage talked about how searching for meaning wasn't about discovering one universal truth. It was about the courage to keep asking, to keep evolving, to keep growing. The journey itself was the answer. The fact that they were all seeking together was the true purpose. A quiet smile crept across Emily's face as she closed the book. She wasn't done with her search, but maybe, just maybe, she had found the peace she needed to continue it. As she turned off her lamp and lay back in bed that night, Emily whispered softly to herself, I'm not alone. I don't need all the answers right now. The journey is enough. And for the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly at peace with that. The weather was turning warmer now, the coolness of winter giving way to the early touches of spring. Emily walked through the park on her way home from school, the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers hanging in the air. The world seemed brighter these days, and she found herself noticing things she might have overlooked before. An elderly couple holding hands on a bench, children laughing as they played, the way the sunlight reflected off the pond. These small moments, these simple joys, felt more meaningful now. The book that Lily had sent her was quickly becoming a trusted companion. Emily had been devouring its pages, each story a small revelation, a new perspective on the search for purpose. The author, an eclectic philosopher, explored how people from all walks of life found meaning in their own ways, through art, relationships, service, and even in the face of adversity. Emily had been reading late into the night, sometimes under her covers with a flashlight, finding pieces of herself in the stories of others. It was a Saturday morning when Emily's father, John, surprised her with a suggestion. He had always been a man of science, often dismissing anything that seemed too abstract or spiritual. But today, something was different. He looked at her over his coffee, his brow furrowed with thought. Em, I've been thinking about something, he began, his voice calm but serious. You've been reading a lot about this, searching for meaning stuff. And I've been wondering if you'd be open to exploring something else with me. Maybe we could take a trip, just the two of us. Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Where to? John hesitated for a moment before answering. There's a conference coming up next month. It's about personal growth, understanding the world, and how science and spirituality intersect. I know it's not exactly what you've been reading about, but I thought it could be interesting. It might help us understand some of these questions better together. Emily sat back in her chair, surprised. Her father had always been skeptical of anything that wasn't rooted in concrete evidence. But this was different. This was an invitation for both of them to explore something outside their usual comfort zones. "I'd like that," Emily said, her heart lifting. "I've been thinking a lot about the connection between science and spirituality. Maybe this conference will give us some answers, or at least help us understand each other better." John smiled, clearly pleased. "I think it could be a good opportunity for both of us." As the days went by, Emily's excitement about the trip grew. She had no idea what to expect from the conference, but the idea of exploring new ideas with her father felt like an important step. She had been on her own journey of discovery, but now she would have the chance to explore it with him. It felt like a bridge between their worlds, her search for meaning, his scientific approach to the universe. When the weekend of the conference finally arrived, Emily and John packed their bags and headed out to the city where the event was being held. The atmosphere was electric as they arrived at the conference center, filled with people from all walks of life. There were professors, students, spiritual leaders, and seekers of all kinds, each of them eager to dive deeper into the questions that had been on Emily's mind for so long. The first session they attended was a panel discussion about the intersection of science and spirituality. Several speakers, each from different backgrounds, shared their perspectives on how the two could coexist, how they could complement each other rather than contradict. Emily was captivated. For the first time, she felt like someone was speaking directly to her, talking about the very questions she had been struggling with. One speaker, a neuroscientist turned spiritual guide, spoke about how the human brain processed meaning and the connections between personal experiences and larger, universal truths. She discussed the ways in which the mind could open to experiences beyond the physical, how the brain could help people feel connected to something greater than themselves. "The brain is not just a biological organ," the speaker said, "but a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. When we learn to listen to our intuition, to trust our inner knowing, we tap into something much bigger than ourselves. It's not just about finding answers, it's about becoming aware of the deeper truths that are already there." Emily's heart raced as she listened. Everything the speaker was saying resonated with her. The idea that the search for meaning wasn't just an intellectual pursuit, but something deeply felt, deeply connected to our very essence. It was the first time she had heard someone speak so freely about the connection between science and spirituality, and it felt like a revelation. When the panel ended, Emily and John stood up, both lost in their thoughts. They walked outside to grab a cup of coffee before the next session, and Emily turned to her father with a sense of excitement. "Dad, did you hear what she said about intuition? How it's not just a feeling, but something our brain is attuned to, something we can learn to trust." John nodded thoughtfully, looking more contemplative than Emily had seen him in a long time. "I did. It's interesting. I've always thought of intuition as something random, maybe even unreliable. But the idea that it's tied to how we process the world on a deeper level, that's new to me." "Yeah, me too," Emily said, her mind buzzing with the possibilities. "Maybe our minds are more connected to the answers than we realize. Maybe the search isn't just about asking questions, it's about learning how to listen." The rest of the weekend flew by, filled with sessions, conversations, and ideas that challenged Emily's understanding of the world. She felt a deep sense of connection to the people around her, to the speakers, and even to her father. It was as if they were all on the same journey, searching for meaning, exploring the vast unknown together. As they left the conference and headed back home, Emily felt a newfound sense of clarity. The search for answers wasn't just about finding concrete truths. It was about being open to the mysteries, the connections, and the experiences that life offered. It was about trusting the journey and allowing herself to be guided by both reason and intuition, by science and spirituality. When they arrived back home, Emily sat down at her desk, pulling out her journal. She wrote furiously, capturing the thoughts and insights that had flooded her mind over the weekend. The conference had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, and she felt more connected than ever to the larger questions she had been asking. As she wrote, she realized that her search for meaning wasn't a solitary journey. She was part of something much bigger, part of a world full of people all seeking answers, all struggling to make sense of the same mysteries. And in that moment, Emily understood something she hadn't before. It wasn't the answers that mattered most. It was the willingness to keep searching, the courage to keep asking, and the openness to the unexpected answers that would come along the way. It had been a week since Emily and her father returned from the conference, and she felt like she was still processing everything she had learned. The insights from the weekend were still fresh in her mind, constantly drifting back into her thoughts. She found herself paying more attention to the world around her, the way people interacted, the way she experienced the simplest moments. Something had shifted within her, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. One afternoon, Emily sat at her kitchen table, her journal open in front of her. The pen in her hand hovered over the page as she tried to collect her thoughts. She had been writing about her search for meaning for weeks now, but the words had become less about asking questions and more about observing the world with fresh eyes. It wasn't that the questions had disappeared. It was more that she had learned to live with them, to embrace them without needing to have all the answers. And that, in itself, felt like progress. Her dad walked into the kitchen, looking over her shoulder at the pages filled with her reflections. Emily smiled at him, feeling a sense of gratitude for his willingness to join her on this journey, even if he didn't fully understand everything she was experiencing. "You seem deep in thought, Em," John said, grabbing a coffee mug from the counter. "Yeah, just trying to figure some things out," Emily replied, still staring at her journal. "I feel like everything is starting to make more sense, but it's also kind of overwhelming. Like, there's so much more to learn, and sometimes it feels like I'll never reach the end of it." John sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about something too. After the conference, I started wondering if maybe we're not meant to finish this search. What if it's more about living with the questions? What if the point is to keep growing, keep evolving, and never really have everything figured out?" Emily looked up at him, surprised. "I think that's exactly it, Dad. It's not about finding the answer to everything. It's about living the questions, being okay with the uncertainty and trusting that we're still learning." Her father smiled softly, a look of quiet pride in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear you say that, Em. I think you're right. Maybe I've been too focused on the need for concrete answers myself. But maybe it's about something more subtle, about learning how to be in the moment, even when we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling in the air around them. Emily felt a quiet sense of peace, as if a burden had been lifted. It wasn't that everything was suddenly clear. It was that she no longer felt the need to have everything figured out all at once. The journey itself had value, and the small moments of clarity she found along the way were enough. Later that afternoon, Emily decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. She felt like she needed some space to think, to allow herself to process the things she had been learning. As she walked, her thoughts turned to her mother. She had been thinking about her a lot recently, especially with the new insights she had gained at the conference. Emily had spent so many years focusing on the pain of losing her, but now, she felt a new sense of connection to her. Maybe her mother's love wasn't something that had disappeared when she passed away. Maybe it was still here, in the world around her, in the people she loved, and even in Emily herself. As Emily walked along the quiet streets, she saw the neighborhood in a new light. The trees seemed greener, the houses warmer, and even the people she passed on the sidewalk had a sense of familiarity that hadn't been there before. The world felt more interconnected, more alive. It was as if she could feel the presence of everything, past, present, and future, mingling together in a single moment. When she reached the park, she sat down on the same bench where she and Lily had talked about their questions just a few weeks ago. It seemed like so much had changed since then, yet in many ways, it felt like the same search. But now, it wasn't about finding definitive answers. It was about being open to the mysteries, allowing the answers to unfold in their own time. As Emily sat there, reflecting on everything she had learned, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from having all the answers. It was a deeper, quieter calm that came from accepting the unknown, from embracing the journey without feeling like she had to reach the end right away. She realized that the search for meaning wasn't a destination. It was the path itself, the way she walked through life with curiosity, compassion, and an open heart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw that she had a message from Lily. "Hey, Em. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know things have been a little crazy lately, but I hope you're still finding time to reflect and think. You're doing great." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of connection with her friend. It had been so helpful to have someone like Lily to talk to, someone who was also on this journey of questioning and searching. Lily had always been a steady presence in her life, offering support and encouragement without judgment. Emily quickly typed a response. "Thanks, Lily. I'm doing okay. I've been thinking a lot about the things we talked about, and I feel like I'm starting to understand things a little more. It's still a journey, but I think I'm okay with not having all the answers. It feels peaceful." She hit send and sat back on the bench, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. Emily didn't know what the future held or where this journey would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. She was exactly where she needed to be. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't chasing after the answers. She was simply living the questions, and that, in itself, was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It had been a month since Emily had started to embrace the idea that the search for meaning wasn't about finding a definitive destination, but about the journey itself. Life seemed to be moving along at a steady pace. She was growing, learning, and becoming more at peace with the uncertainties that used to overwhelm her. But little did she know, her path was about to take another unexpected turn. One cool evening, as Emily sat at her desk working on an essay for school, she heard a soft knock on the door. It wasn't unusual for her father to pop in to check on her, so she didn't think much of it. "Come in," she called, looking up from her work. But it wasn't her father who stepped into the room. Instead, it was someone Emily had not expected to see in her home for a very long time. Her grandmother, Claire. Emily jumped up from her desk, startled, but also deeply moved. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed, a mixture of surprise and joy filling her voice. Her grandmother smiled, her face warm and full of love. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing. I know we haven't talked much lately, but I've been hearing how much you've been growing, Emily. It sounds like you're on quite a journey." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. Her grandmother had always been a calming presence in her life, a steady force who never seemed to doubt the importance of love, kindness, and faith. But it had been a while since they had spent time together, especially after Emily's mother had passed. For a moment, Emily wasn't sure what to say, but she finally managed to speak. "I'm so glad to see you, Grandma," she said, her voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot about things, about life, about purpose, about God. And honestly, I feel like I'm starting to understand things better. But it's still hard sometimes. It's like I'm on this journey, but I don't know where it's going." Her grandmother nodded thoughtfully, sitting down beside Emily at her desk. "You know, Emily," she said, her voice gentle yet firm, "life is a journey. And what you're going through right now, that search for meaning, is one that many people face. The key is knowing that you're not alone on that journey, even when it feels like you are." Emily was quiet for a moment, trying to absorb what her grandmother had just said. She'd heard those words before, but hearing them from her grandmother, someone who had lived a full life with its own struggles and triumphs, made them feel more real, more tangible. "I've been thinking about that a lot," Emily said slowly, "that I'm not alone. I have friends like Lily and my dad. He's been so supportive lately, even though he doesn't always understand everything I'm going through. But there's still this part of me that wonders, if I'm just looking for answers in all the wrong places. What if none of this really matters?" Her grandmother reached over and placed a hand gently on Emily's. "Sweetheart, I understand how you feel. I know it can seem like there's no clear answer, that everything is just a series of questions without a resolution. But let me tell you something I've learned in my life. The search for meaning, the questions we ask, it's all part of God's plan. And even though we might not always understand the answers, there's beauty in the seeking. There's grace in the journey." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Her grandmother's words were like a soothing balm, touching a part of her that had been hurting for so long. She had been seeking answers for what felt like forever, but hearing her grandmother speak with such conviction made Emily feel like maybe the journey was enough. Maybe she didn't need all the answers. Maybe the act of searching, of asking the tough questions, was a form of growth in itself. "I think I get it," Emily whispered. "The searching itself, living with the questions, is part of the beauty of life." Her grandmother smiled, her eyes sparkling with wisdom. "Exactly. And Emily, there's something else I want you to remember. Even when you feel lost or uncertain, you are surrounded by love. You're never truly alone. God is always with you, guiding you, even in the moments you don't understand." Emily nodded, taking in her grandmother's words. She had always known that her grandmother had a deep faith, a kind of unwavering belief that transcended the trials and tribulations of life. Emily had always admired her for it, but now she felt herself beginning to understand, at least a little bit, what that faith meant. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know exactly where her journey was leading. All she needed to do was continue walking, trusting in the process, and knowing that she wasn't walking alone. As the evening wore on, Emily and her grandmother talked for hours. They spoke of family, memories, love, and loss. Her grandmother shared stories of her own spiritual journey, of the moments when she had struggled with doubt but always found comfort in her faith. Emily listened intently, feeling a deep sense of connection to her grandmother's experiences. It was as though, through her grandmother's stories, Emily could trace the contours of her own journey. Before she left that night, her grandmother pulled Emily into a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you, my dear. You're doing beautifully. Keep asking, keep seeking, and keep living with love. It will always lead you where you need to go." After she left, Emily sat in her room, reflecting on the evening. Her grandmother's visit had been a gentle reminder that she didn't have to walk her path alone. She had the love of her family, the support of her friends, and the guidance of something greater than herself. It was okay not to have everything figured out. What mattered was continuing to walk, to search, to love, and to be open to the answers that might come, even if they weren't always the ones she expected. As Emily lay in bed that night, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The journey ahead still seemed vast and uncertain, but now she was ready for it. Because no matter how long it took or how many questions remained unanswered, Emily knew she wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed her grandmother's visit, Emily found herself thinking about her words more than ever. The quiet, reassuring confidence in her grandmother's voice had been a balm for Emily's restless heart. It was as if a subtle shift had occurred within her, one that allowed her to look at the questions she had been asking not as burdens but as invitations. Invitations to grow, to seek, and to live a life of purpose, whether or not she had all the answers. School had become both a refuge and a reminder of the uncertainties she was still facing. Despite her academic achievements, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something missing. She wasn't sure if it was the ongoing search for deeper meaning, or just the normal teenage experience of feeling like something was always just out of reach, but the feeling persisted. One day after school, Emily found herself walking to the park, a place that had become her sanctuary in recent months. The fresh spring air filled her lungs as she sat down on the same bench where she had spent so many hours reflecting and writing. The world around her seemed to hum with the life of the season. Children playing in the distance, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the occasional chirp of a bird. The park had become more than just a place to think. It had become a place where Emily could feel the connection between herself and the world, between her and the people who were on their own journeys. As she sat there, her thoughts drifted back to her father. The distance between them had been slowly closing over the past few months, as they both found ways to engage more deeply with each other. While her dad still hadn't fully embraced the idea of spirituality in the way Emily had, he had become more open to exploring the ways in which science and the unknown could coexist. They had spent hours discussing topics, often in the quiet of their living room, over cups of coffee. John was starting to understand that Emily's search for meaning wasn't just a phase. It was a part of her, just as his work in technology was a part of him. She saw him not just as her father, but as someone who was, in his own way, also looking for answers. That afternoon, as Emily sat lost in thought, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Lily, who had been her rock through all of this. "Hey, Em. I was thinking about what we talked about last time, about how the search for meaning doesn't have to have a clear endpoint. I think you're really onto something there. I'm proud of you, girl. Keep going." Emily smiled and typed a quick reply. "Thanks, Lily. You have no idea how much your support means to me. I think I'm starting to feel okay with not knowing everything. It's like I'm starting to understand that it's okay to just be." Lily's reply was almost immediate. "That's amazing. It's honestly the hardest thing to accept, but I'm so glad you're feeling it too. It's like we're always searching for something, but maybe the real peace comes from just living in the moment. I don't know, something like that." Emily sat back, rereading Lily's message. It struck her that the simplicity of Lily's words, living in the moment, was exactly what she had been missing. Emily had been so focused on the big questions, the deep existential search for purpose, that she had almost forgotten how to live in the here and now. Maybe, just maybe, the answers would come not through frantic searching but through living fully in the present, embracing life with all its uncertainties, its joys, and its challenges. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't Lily. It was her dad. "Hey, Em, do you want to go grab dinner later tonight? Just the two of us. I've been thinking about some things, and I'd love to talk." Emily felt a sense of warmth at her father's invitation. It wasn't just about food, it was about connection. She had felt this distance between them for a long time, but now, something was changing. The walls that had once existed between them were slowly coming down, brick by brick. She had never felt closer to him than she did in that moment. "Yeah, that sounds great," Emily texted back, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'll meet you at 6. She closed her phone and took a deep breath, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her father was making the effort to reach out to her, to engage in the conversations that mattered, and she realized just how much that meant. For so long, she had felt like they were living in different worlds, but now, they were on the same path, even if they were walking it in different ways. That evening, they sat across from each other at a small restaurant downtown. The ambience was cozy, the dim lighting casting soft shadows across the table. Emily could feel the tension in the air, but it wasn't an uncomfortable tension. It was the kind of quiet that comes from knowing something important is about to be said. John began, his voice steady but filled with an emotion she hadn't heard before. "I've been thinking about everything you've been going through, and I guess I'm starting to understand something. Maybe I haven't always been there for you in the way you needed, but I want you to know that I'm here now. I'm here to listen." Emily's heart swelled. She hadn't expected this. Her father had always been practical, rational, and often distant when it came to matters of emotion. But now, sitting across from her, there was a tenderness in his eyes, a willingness to see things from her perspective. "I know you're on this journey," John continued, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "And I'm proud of you. I don't always get it, but I want to understand. If you'll have me, I'll walk with you in my own way." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Her father had just given her something she had wanted for so long. His support, his understanding, and most importantly, his presence in her search for meaning. "I'd like that," Emily said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I'd like that a lot." They sat there for a long time, talking about everything and nothing at all. Emily realized that the questions she had been carrying for so long no longer felt as heavy. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't about finding all the answers. It was about the willingness to keep asking, to keep searching, and to keep living. As they finished their dinner and walked out into the cool evening air, Emily felt a renewed sense of connection. With her father, with herself, with the world around her. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She just needed to keep living the questions. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. After that evening with her father, something had shifted within Emily. It wasn't something she could put into words, but she felt lighter. There was a new understanding between her and her dad, a deeper bond forged in shared vulnerability and mutual respect. It felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, a burden that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The simple acknowledgement that her father was walking alongside her, even in his own way, filled her with a sense of calm she hadn't expected. But life had a way of reminding her that the journey was ongoing. Just a few days later, Emily found herself in yet another conversation that would challenge her understanding of what it meant to seek meaning. It started innocently enough. Emily had been walking home from school when she bumped into her friend Grace. Grace was a few years older than Emily, and they had bonded over a shared love of literature and deep, philosophical conversations. Grace had been one of the first people Emily had opened up to about her questions about God, purpose, and life's meaning, and Emily had always appreciated how Grace listened without judgment. "Hey, Em," Grace called out as she approached, her face lighting up with a smile. "How've you been?" "I've been good, actually," Emily replied, falling into step beside her. "Things are different, you know? I'm still trying to figure things out, but it feels a little clearer these days." Grace raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Different? In what way?" Emily paused for a moment, considering how to explain it. "Well, I guess I've started to realize that I don't need to have everything figured out all at once. Like, I've been so focused on finding the answers to everything, about life, about God, about purpose, but now I'm starting to think that maybe it's okay to live the questions. Maybe the search itself is just as important as the answers." Grace's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "That's interesting. I've been thinking about something similar lately. You know how we always talk about finding our purpose, right? Well, I'm starting to wonder if that's even the right question to ask. What if we're so focused on finding a purpose that we miss the beauty in just being?" Emily looked at her, surprised by the depth of Grace's words. It was a thought she hadn't considered before, and it made her stop in her tracks for a moment. "You mean, what if we're not supposed to find a purpose?" Grace shrugged thoughtfully. "I don't know. I think we get so caught up in the idea that we need to have some grand plan or mission in life, and that we have to figure it out before we die. But what if purpose is something we create along the way? What if it's not some big, cosmic thing we're supposed to uncover, but something we build in each moment? Something we find in the way we live, how we treat people, how we engage with the world?" Emily's mind began to race as she processed Grace's words. The idea that purpose might not be a destination, but a process, something created in the moments between the questions, was revolutionary. It made perfect sense. In all her searching for meaning, Emily had often thought of purpose as something static, something she had to discover. But now, with Grace's insight, she realized that purpose could be dynamic, something she lived out with every choice, every action, and every interaction. "That's actually really beautiful," Emily said quietly, a smile tugging at her lips. "Purpose isn't something we find. It's something we create. It's about how we show up in the world, right?" Grace smiled back, clearly pleased by Emily's response. "Exactly. It's not about having some grand plan laid out for us. It's about being present, being engaged, and letting our lives unfold in a way that feels true to who we are. We're constantly creating meaning, even if we don't always see it at the time." As they continued walking, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. Grace's perspective had struck a chord within her. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was trying to solve. It was a new way of looking at life, one that didn't involve pressure or the constant need for answers. Instead, it was a way of embracing the journey, moment by moment, and knowing that meaning could be found not in grand revelations, but in the small, quiet acts of everyday life. That evening, Emily sat at her desk, reflecting on her conversation with Grace. Her journal lay open in front of her, but she wasn't sure what to write at first. She had so many thoughts swirling in her mind, but it all seemed to circle back to one idea: living with intention, without the need for rigid answers. She picked up her pen, the words flowing easily as she began to write. "Purpose isn't something I need to find. It's something I create. It's not a destination, but a process, a journey in itself. Every moment holds the potential to add meaning. Every decision, every interaction. Each one is part of the puzzle that makes up my life. The purpose I've been searching for isn't something that can be discovered at the end of a quest. It's woven into the fabric of the journey itself. As she wrote, Emily felt a sense of relief. The pressure to find the answer to everything seemed to lift. It wasn't that she had solved all of life's mysteries. It was that she had come to a place of acceptance. She didn't need to know everything. She just needed to live, to be present, and to allow the moments to create the meaning she had been seeking. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, her thoughts turned to her father. She remembered their dinner together, the quiet connection they shared, and how she had felt supported in her journey. She thought about her grandmother's visit and how her words had stayed with her. And she thought about Grace and the quiet revelation she had shared with her. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The search for meaning, for purpose, wasn't a race. It was a dance, a slow unfolding of life, one step at a time. And she didn't need to have all the answers today. She was learning to embrace the journey, and that, in itself, was enough. The weeks following her conversation with Grace felt different. Emily had started to approach life with a quieter, more peaceful perspective. Instead of constantly searching for the right answers, she had embraced the idea that the answers would come in their own time, through living and experiencing. She felt a subtle shift in the way she interacted with the world, as if she were no longer rushing towards some distant finish line, but rather walking alongside it, noticing the beauty of the journey itself. However, one aspect of her life still troubled her. Emily had not yet fully opened up to her father about her deeper thoughts on spirituality. She knew he was trying harder than ever to understand her search for meaning, but the subject of God, faith, and her growing curiosity about religion had always been a source of tension between them. Emily wasn't sure how to broach the subject. Her father was a man of reason, grounded firmly in the world of technology and logic. Faith had never been something he expressed openly, and yet, he had made strides in supporting Emily's exploration of it. They had shared quiet talks about science, philosophy, and their personal beliefs, but they hadn't yet ventured into the territory of the divine. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emily felt a strange sense of anticipation. Her father was sitting across from her, his eyes focused on a news story on his tablet, while she flipped through a book on philosophy, her thoughts elsewhere. The quiet between them was comfortable but heavy, as if there were something unspoken lingering in the air. Emily had always felt that her dad wanted to understand her better, but she hadn't yet found the courage to invite him into the most personal part of her journey. Tonight, however, she felt it. There was a kind of quiet urgency in her, as if the time had come to open up, to share the part of herself she hadn't yet fully revealed. "Dad?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. John looked up from his tablet, surprised. "Yeah, Em? What's on your mind?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her book nervously. "I've been thinking about something. About faith, actually. And I realize I haven't really talked to you about it." Her father raised an eyebrow, setting his tablet aside. "I'm listening," he said, giving her his full attention. The openness in his voice made Emily feel both nervous and safe at the same time. "I know you've been patient with me," Emily continued, "and I know we've talked a lot about, well, life and all that. But there's this other part of me, this search for meaning, for something bigger than myself, that I haven't really shared with you. I think it's time." John leaned forward, his gaze softening. "You know, Em, I've always wanted to understand more about where you're coming from. I've seen you wrestle with these big questions, and I've tried to respect that, but I'm not sure I really get it. You know, I'm not religious in the traditional sense." Emily nodded. "I know, Dad, and I'm not trying to push you into believing anything you don't. I guess I'm just trying to find my own path, you know? And sometimes, I feel like there's this bigger thing out there that I can't quite grasp, but I can't stop searching for it. I know I'm not going to figure it all out, but it's like, I need to try." John's expression softened as he listened. "I don't know what that feels like, to be honest," he admitted. "I've always trusted what I could see, what I could prove. And I guess the idea of faith, of believing in something I can't see or touch, has always been hard for me. But I do see how it's important to you, how it's something you need to explore. And I respect that, Emily. I really do." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had expected this conversation to be difficult, but hearing her father speak so honestly about his own struggles with faith brought a deep sense of connection. He wasn't condemning her or trying to convince her that she was wrong. He was simply acknowledging the difference between them and respecting her journey. "I know you're not asking me to have all the answers," John continued, "and I'm not asking you to stop searching. But I do want you to know something. No matter where this search takes you, no matter what conclusions you come to, you will always have me. I may not understand it all, but I'm here, and I want to be part of that journey, even if it's in a way that makes sense to me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she heard the sincerity in her father's voice. The quiet truth she had longed to hear had finally been spoken, not just as a statement, but as an invitation. Her father wasn't asking her to stop questioning or to abandon her search for meaning. He was offering his support, his love, and his presence, even in the face of uncertainty. "Thank you, Dad," Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That means everything to me." John smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "You're my daughter. I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Your journey is your own, and I'll support it however I can." As Emily sat there, soaking in her father's words, she realized that this was a moment of true growth. She had been afraid to confront the unspoken truths between them, the fear of judgment, the worry of being misunderstood. But in opening up to her father, she had discovered something far more valuable: the freedom to explore her beliefs without the pressure of needing to fit them into anyone else's framework. Her father had given her the gift of acceptance, of knowing that she could walk this path with him by her side, even if they walked it in different ways. That night, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The unspoken truths between her and her father had finally been shared, and in doing so, a new level of understanding had emerged. She was no longer carrying the weight of her search for meaning alone. She had her father's support, her grandmother's wisdom, and her friends' encouragement. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Emily no longer feared it. As she lay in bed that night, she closed her eyes with a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a true sense of connection, not just to her father, but to herself, to the world, and to the vast mystery of life that she was still learning to embrace. The questions hadn't gone away, but in that moment, she realized that was okay. The answers she was coming to understand were not the destination. They were part of the journey itself. The days that followed her conversation with her father seemed quieter, but in the best possible way. Emily had found a sense of calm in her heart, a peace that had eluded her for a long time. Sharing her search for meaning with her father had not only brought them closer, but it had also helped her feel more certain in her own path. She no longer felt the need to hide her doubts or her questions, nor did she feel burdened by them. Instead, she began to accept that these questions were simply part of the process, and perhaps the answers would come when they were meant to. But as much as her relationship with her father had grown stronger, there was still another part of her life that felt unfinished: her relationship with God. She had often wondered if there was a greater purpose to all of this, the searching, the questioning, and if she could ever truly connect with a higher power in a way that felt authentic. Despite all her thoughts and the guidance of people like her grandmother and Grace, Emily knew that her spiritual journey was still in its early stages. It wasn't until a Sunday morning a few weeks later, when she accompanied her father to a community event, that a small but significant change took place. It was the annual charity run in their town, and John had signed up to participate. Emily didn't usually enjoy these events, finding them a bit too formal and overwhelming. But today, for some reason, she felt compelled to join him, to be there, even if it was just as a spectator. They arrived at the park early, the sun still low in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the rows of volunteers setting up tables and booths. Emily and her dad made their way to the registration area, where people from the local community were gathering to check in and get ready. There were faces she recognized: neighbors, people from school, and even a few church members she hadn't seen in a while. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" her father asked as they stood near the starting line. His tone was gentle, though he seemed somewhat uncertain about her being there. "Yeah, I'm fine," Emily replied with a small smile. "I figured I'd come cheer you on. Plus, it's kind of nice to be out here with all these people." It feels different, peaceful in a way. John raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her response. Well, I'm glad you're here. It'll be good to have you around, even if you're not running. As the race started and runners surged forward, Emily found herself watching not just the runners but the people around her. The volunteers, the families, the children, and something struck her. There was a deep sense of community here, of people coming together for a cause larger than themselves. It was the kind of thing she had read about in books or heard in conversations with her grandmother, but it wasn't until now, standing among the crowd, that she truly understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than oneself. Emily stood by the water station, offering cups of water to the runners as they passed by. It wasn't much, but there was something profoundly meaningful in it. Something simple, but undeniably beautiful. She watched as people smiled and thanked her for offering them water, and she realized that these small acts of kindness, of connection, were what made the world feel less lonely. It wasn't about grand gestures, she thought. It was about being present, about sharing in the experiences of others, and about offering whatever help you could, no matter how small. Halfway through the event, Emily found herself sitting on a bench, feeling oddly reflective. She had spent the past few hours thinking about everything that had led her here. Her questions about God, the long discussions with her father, Grace's perspectives, and her grandmother's gentle wisdom. And now, in this quiet moment, she realized that she was no longer just asking questions for the sake of answers. She was beginning to live the questions, to embrace them as part of her journey, and that, in itself, felt like progress. A man walked by, and something about the way he smiled at her made her pause. He wasn't a runner. He was a volunteer, helping to set up a booth for the event. But his warm expression and the way he offered a simple hello reminded her of something she had once read in a book about faith. It wasn't the grand proclamations or dramatic moments of revelation that brought people closer to God. It was the small, everyday interactions, the kindnesses shared between strangers, the understanding between friends, the patience of a parent, that often held the deepest connection to the divine. Emily felt a soft, subtle shift within herself. Maybe, she thought, this was the essence of what she had been searching for all along. Not some overwhelming, divine moment, but the quiet understanding that life itself, lived with love, kindness, and intention, was a reflection of something greater. Maybe God wasn't in the grand gestures or the answers she sought. Maybe God was in these quiet moments of connection, these simple acts of kindness, and the way people came together in community. As the race came to a close and the crowd began to disperse, Emily's father approached her with a big grin on his face. He had finished the race in a respectable time, though he looked tired and sweaty. Emily stood up and gave him a high five. "You did it, Dad," she cheered, laughing as she hugged him. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Em," he said, still catching his breath. "That was a lot tougher than I thought it would be. But it feels good to finish, you know? It's not just about the race, but about being part of something bigger. I guess that's what the whole point is, connecting with others and supporting each other along the way." Emily smiled as she looked around at the crowd. It was as if her father's words had put the finishing touch on her own thoughts. Being part of something bigger was what had resonated with her the most today. And in that moment, Emily felt a quiet, understanding bloom inside her heart. Maybe God wasn't something to be understood or figured out. Maybe it was something to be lived, something to be experienced in the everyday moments of connection, compassion, and community. As they walked back to the car, Emily realized that she didn't have all the answers. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need them. Maybe the search for meaning was less about finding the answers and more about living the questions. And that, she felt, was enough for now. As the days grew warmer and the seasons shifted, Emily felt herself drawn more and more to the stillness of nature. It was a strange, almost magnetic pull, one she hadn't anticipated. She had always been someone who preferred bustling city streets, the noise of busy shops, the hum of activity around her. But lately, she had found solace in quieter places, those that offered no distractions, no deadlines, and no expectations. Places that allowed her to breathe deeply and think without the constant pressure of life. One particular Saturday morning, Emily decided to take a walk in the nearby park. It had been a few weeks since the charity event, And while she had felt a great deal of peace from her experience, there were still parts of her soul that felt restless. She had spent so much time in her head, questioning everything from her purpose to her understanding of God, that she had started to lose touch with the simple pleasures of just being. The park, she thought, might offer the kind of quiet reflection she needed. Her father was busy with work, and her grandmother was visiting a friend, so Emily set out alone, her mind calm but alert. The sun was already high in the sky, casting long shadows over the walking paths. Birds chirped from the branches of tall trees, and the air was fresh with the scent of flowers beginning to bloom. It was the kind of morning that felt timeless, as if the world had paused just for her to take it in. As she walked along the path, Emily's thoughts drifted back to her recent conversations, her father's acceptance of her spiritual journey, Grace's insight about living the questions, and even her grandmother's quiet wisdom about faith. Each of them had helped guide her toward a deeper understanding of herself, but there was still a part of her that felt incomplete, like she was standing at the edge of something, waiting for a sign to show her the way forward. After walking for some time, Emily found a bench under a large oak tree. It looked like the perfect place to sit and reflect. She had no particular agenda in mind, no burning question she needed answered. She simply wanted to be still. Sitting down, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the park wash over her. The rustling of leaves, the distant sound of children playing, the soft breeze against her skin. All of it seemed to center her. It was in this quiet stillness that she suddenly felt a shift. It wasn't a loud, dramatic moment, but a subtle one, like a whisper from the universe that she had only just begun to hear. Maybe this is enough, she thought quietly to herself. Maybe the journey itself is enough. The idea resonated with her, so simple and yet so profound. For so long, Emily had been chasing after answers, searching for clarity, for purpose, for meaning. She had thought that if she could just figure it all out, everything would fall into place. But in this moment, sitting under the oak tree, she realized something important. Perhaps life wasn't about reaching some final destination, some place where all the questions were answered. Perhaps it was about learning to live in the questions, to embrace the unknown, to be present in each moment as it came. Emily opened her eyes and gazed at the sky above, a soft blue stretching endlessly before her. A feeling of peace washed over her as she allowed herself to simply be, to not have all the answers, to not need them. It was a freedom she had never experienced before, the kind that came from accepting that it was okay not to know everything. As she sat there, deep in thought, a soft voice interrupted her musings. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" a man's voice said. Emily turned her head and saw an older man sitting on the bench next to hers. He had a kind face, his eyes twinkling with warmth. There was something about him that reminded her of her grandmother, a sense of quiet wisdom that seemed to radiate from his very presence. "It is," Emily replied with a smile. "It feels like the perfect day for reflection." The man nodded, looking out over the park with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I come here often," he said. "It's one of the few places where I can find peace. The world gets so busy, so loud. But here, in the quiet, I find a sense of connection. Connection to myself, to the world, and to something bigger." Emily considered his words. There was something familiar in them, something she had been trying to articulate for weeks. "I've been thinking a lot about connection lately," she admitted. "About what it means to be connected to the world, to people, and even to something beyond all of that. But I'm still not sure what it all means." The man smiled gently. "I think that's the key, isn't it? The not knowing. Sometimes, we think we need to have all the answers, to figure everything out. But I've learned that it's the questions that matter more. The search for meaning, the openness to mystery, that's where the real growth happens. And along the way, we find connections we never expected. It's like life is a conversation between us and the universe, and the most important part isn't the answers we find, but the questions we ask." Emily sat in silence, letting his words sink in. She felt a deep sense of gratitude toward this stranger who had, in just a few words, helped her see the truth she had been struggling to articulate for so long. It wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about embracing the process. The search itself was valuable. The questions themselves were part of what made life meaningful. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. "I think I needed to hear that today." The man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sometimes, all we need is a little reminder. The answers will come when they're ready. Until then, just keep asking." With that, he stood up, gave Emily a nod of encouragement, and walked away, leaving her with the peaceful feeling that had been growing inside her. As she sat there, watching the man disappear into the park, Emily felt a shift deep within her. The weight of her search for answers lifted, and in its place, she felt a sense of lightness, of clarity. Life wasn't a race to the finish line. It was a journey of discovery, a conversation that unfolded with each question, each moment of connection. As she stood up and walked away from the bench, Emily realized that she wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. The mystery of life didn't need to be solved. It could be lived, moment by moment, question by question. And in that, she had found her peace. The following week, Emily felt as though she was in the midst of a transformation, one that wasn't loud or obvious, but quietly profound. The sense of peace she had found during her walk in the park seemed to be taking root deep within her, and though she didn't have all the answers, she didn't feel anxious about it anymore. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to simply be. She went about her days with a renewed sense of calm, almost as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't that she had stopped wondering about the bigger questions of life, questions about faith, about God, about her purpose, but the urgency with which she had once pursued answers had faded. There was a new acceptance within her, a willingness to experience life as it came, with all its unknowns and mysteries. One evening, after a long day of school and helping her father with his latest project, Emily found herself sitting at the kitchen table, looking over her journal. She had been keeping a record of her thoughts, a collection of questions and reflections that had begun to shape her spiritual journey. She hadn't been writing for answers, she realized, but for understanding of her heart, her thoughts, and her emotions. Writing had become a way of sorting through her feelings, and as she reread some of her entries, she was surprised at how far she had come. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Grace. "Grace. Hey, Em. I was thinking about you today. I've been working on something for the church, and I'd love to share it with you. It's a small project, but it's really meaningful to me. I think it might resonate with you too. Would you be open to meeting tomorrow?" Emily smiled at the message. It had been a while since she and Grace had talked, and the idea of catching up felt right. The last time they spoke, Emily was still wrestling with her questions about faith, unsure of where she stood. But now, after her quiet moments of reflection and the insights she had gained, she felt open to whatever Grace wanted to share. "Emily, I'd love to meet. Tomorrow works for me. Let me know where and when." After sending the message, Emily set the phone down and went back to her journal. She wrote a few more sentences, trying to capture the peaceful sense of clarity that had enveloped her over the past few weeks. The next day, Emily met Grace at a small cafe downtown, a cozy place that always smelled of freshly baked bread and coffee. The sound of chatter filled the air as people sat at tables, sharing meals and laughter. Grace was already there when Emily arrived, sitting by the window with a steaming cup of tea. Her eyes lit up when she saw Emily walk in, and she waved enthusiastically. "Hey you, it's been too long," Grace said, rising to give Emily a quick hug. "Yeah, I've missed our chats," Emily replied, taking a seat across from her. "What's this new project you've been working on? You said it might resonate with me?" Grace smiled, her eyes softening as she placed her tea down on the table. "Well, it's a small project, but it's something I've been passionate about for a while. I've been helping organize a weekly community group for young people at the church. We get together to talk, share, and support one another through whatever we're going through in life. It's not just about faith, but about finding a sense of belonging in this crazy world." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds really interesting. But if it's not just about faith, what's the purpose?" Grace leaned forward, her expression serious but warm. "The purpose is connection. I've realized that so many of us, especially young people, feel disconnected from others. We're all trying to find our place, and sometimes we don't know where to turn. But in these small moments of sharing and listening, we start to see that we're not alone. We're all on this journey together, and that can be incredibly powerful. Emily's heart softened as she listened. She had been feeling the need for connection more than ever lately. Despite the peace she had found in her solitude, she still longed for a deeper sense of belonging. Grace's words struck a chord with her. "I love that," Emily said, her voice quiet. "It sounds like exactly what I've been thinking about lately. It's not just about finding answers. It's about finding people who understand, people who are walking the same path." Grace smiled warmly. "Exactly. And it's in that sharing, that vulnerability, that we find strength. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about being real with each other, and that's where growth happens. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen." Emily nodded, her thoughts spinning. What Grace had said mirrored so much of what she had come to realize in recent weeks. The most important thing wasn't finding all the answers, but experiencing life with others, living in the questions, together. "I think I need to be a part of something like that," Emily said, her voice full of conviction. "I want to be with people who are exploring, who are looking for meaning, just like me. I want to hear their stories, share my own, and see where it takes us." Grace's eyes brightened with excitement. "That's exactly what we're building. It's a safe space for people to grow, to question, and to support each other. And I'd love for you to be a part of it." Over the next few weeks, Emily joined the community group that Grace had helped create. Every Thursday evening, they would meet at the church, a diverse group of young people from different walks of life. Some were searching for answers about faith, others were simply seeking connection, but all of them shared one thing in common: a desire to grow. At first, Emily felt a little out of place. She wasn't used to being so open with her feelings, especially with people she didn't know well. But as the group shared their stories, Emily began to see that they weren't just talking about religion or philosophy, they were talking about life. The struggles, the joys, the uncertainty, the hope. It was all part of the same experience. As weeks went by, Emily found herself growing more comfortable. She started sharing her own story, her own search for meaning, and realized that her questions weren't as unusual as she had once thought. In fact, they were shared by so many others. She wasn't alone in her doubts, in her longing to understand. Together, they were all walking the same path, and in that shared journey, Emily found a deeper sense of connection, not just with the group, but with herself. One evening, after a particularly deep conversation about purpose and faith, Emily left the meeting feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She stood outside the church, the cool evening air brushing against her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being open, being vulnerable, and sharing the journey with others. In that moment, Emily realized that this was the heart of the journey: the relationships, the shared experiences, and the willingness to grow together. And for the first time in her life, she truly felt that she was walking that path with others who understood, who cared, and who were with her every step of the way. The weeks that followed were filled with small moments of revelation for Emily. The community group had become a safe haven for her, a space where her questions were not only welcomed but embraced. Every Thursday evening, she looked forward to the conversations, where everyone shared their thoughts, doubts, and dreams without fear of judgment. It was a rare, beautiful thing to find a group that didn't just talk about religion or beliefs but about life itself, in all its messy, unpredictable glory. Emily felt more connected to herself than she ever had before. She was no longer overwhelmed by the weight of her unanswered questions. Instead, she had learned to accept the questions as part of her journey. But there was still one question that lingered at the back of her mind, one that she had been reluctant to ask, even in the safety of the group. It was a question that had plagued her for months, ever since her conversation with Elon Musk. Does God exist? Emily had begun to understand that faith wasn't about certainty, it was about trust. But who or what was she supposed to trust? Was it the universe, as Grace had suggested? Was it something more personal, more defined? Her heart yearned to understand, but the answers still felt elusive. One Thursday, the group discussion took a different turn. Instead of talking about the usual topics of faith, doubt, and purpose, they found themselves discussing the concept of prayer. For Emily, prayer had always been something distant, a practice that seemed tied to organized religion in a way that didn't feel personal to her. But as the conversation unfolded, something inside her stirred. Grace spoke first, her voice calm but filled with passion. I think prayer is less about asking for things and more about connecting. It's a way to align yourself with the world around you, to find peace in the chaos. It's a way to be vulnerable and to listen, not just to speak. Emily thought about this for a moment. But how do you know if it's working? She asked, her voice unsure. Great question, said another member of the group, Jake, who had recently started attending. I think it's about the feeling it brings, not about immediate results. For me, it's less about whether something happens because I prayed, and more about how I feel after I pray. It's a moment of clarity, a moment where I remember that I'm not alone. Emily's mind raced. What if prayer wasn't about receiving answers or solving problems? What if it was just about being present in the moment, about connecting to something greater than herself without needing it to be tangible or visible? The conversation went on, with more people offering their thoughts. Emily listened intently, but a quiet voice inside her kept circling back to that one burning question. Does God exist? She had heard so many perspectives, so many ideas, and yet the question still sat there like an unresolved puzzle, its pieces just out of reach. After the meeting, Grace approached Emily, sensing her inner turmoil. Hey, Grace said gently. I could see you were deep in thought tonight. You have something on your mind, don't you? Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she was ready to voice her deepest concern. But the openness of the group had given her the courage to ask tough questions, and in Grace, she had found a friend who always seemed to know the right words. I'm still struggling with this question, Emily admitted, her voice small but sincere. Does God really exist? Is there a higher power, something that's guiding all of us? Or are we just here? I want to believe, but it's hard for me to wrap my mind around it. Grace nodded, her expression understanding. That's a question that many people wrestle with, including myself. It's okay to not have all the answers. In fact, I think the most important part of faith is the willingness to ask, to seek, and to wonder. I don't think we're meant to have everything figured out all at once. Maybe the beauty of it is that we get to keep asking and exploring together. Emily felt a weight lift off her chest. The vulnerability of admitting her struggle, of letting her questions be seen, was freeing. So you think it's okay to not have an answer? To just wonder? Absolutely, Grace said softly. In fact, I think that's where growth happens. When we're willing to be open, to live with the uncertainty, that's when we allow ourselves to be transformed. The search itself is sacred, and in that search, we start to understand more about ourselves, and maybe even about the world around us. Emily took in Grace's words, feeling both comforted and challenged. She realized that her fear of uncertainty had held her back for so long. She had been afraid of asking the big questions because she didn't know if she could handle the ambiguity. But now, Emily was beginning to see that it was precisely in the unknown that the answers could begin to unfold. Later that week, as Emily walked home from the group meeting, she found herself thinking about prayer again. The idea of it being a form of connection, a way to align herself with the world, felt more tangible now. As she passed the familiar streets of her neighborhood, she stopped for a moment under a street lamp. The light shone down on her like a soft, steady presence, and Emily felt the urge to try something she had never done before. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. God, she whispered, her voice barely audible but full of intention. If you're out there, if you're real, show me. I don't need all the answers, but I need to feel you. I need to know I'm not alone. She stood there for a long moment, waiting for some sign, some confirmation, but the world around her remained quiet. The wind, the distant sounds of traffic, the soft rustling of leaves. There was no dramatic response, no sudden revelation, but something within her shifted. As she opened her eyes, Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her, a quiet assurance that she wasn't alone in her search. It wasn't an answer, but it was something deeper, a feeling of connection, a knowing that she could continue to ask, to wonder, and that her questions were just as valuable as any answer she might one day find. She smiled softly to herself, feeling lighter than she had in days. The search was far from over, but that was okay. For now, She had the courage to ask, and that was enough. The days following Emily's quiet prayer under the street lamp brought a subtle shift in her life. It wasn't an earth-shattering change, but it was enough to make her feel like something was gently unfolding within her. She found herself more at peace, less weighed down by the urgency of finding answers. The question of God's existence still lingered, but it no longer felt like a burden she had to solve alone. It was simply another part of her ongoing journey. That week, Grace had invited Emily to help with a project at the church. It was a community event, a fundraiser for a local charity, and Grace had asked Emily to design the promotional materials. Emily had always enjoyed art, so it felt like a perfect opportunity to give back in a way that felt true to her talents. As she sat in the church office one afternoon, sketching out the designs on her laptop, Emily noticed a man enter the room. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a suit that looked slightly out of place in the casual office environment. His eyes were kind, though, and he smiled as he walked over to the desk where Emily was working. "Hey there," he said, his voice warm. "I'm Pastor David. I think we've met briefly, but I wanted to introduce myself properly." Emily stood up to shake his hand. "Hi, nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." He chuckled. "All good things, I hope. Grace speaks very highly of you." Emily smiled at the mention of Grace, feeling a sense of pride. She and Grace had developed a strong friendship over the past few months, and it was through Grace that Emily had found her way into the church community. "I'm just helping with the fundraiser," Emily explained. "It's been a fun project so far." Pastor David nodded. "Grace mentioned you've been exploring some deeper questions about life and faith. If you ever want to talk about any of that, I'm always available. I know how hard it can be to search for answers, especially when the questions feel so big." Emily felt a small lump form in her throat. It wasn't often that people openly acknowledged her inner struggles, let alone offered to walk through them with her. She had always been the type to keep her doubts to herself, afraid that asking too many questions would make her seem unsure or weak. "Thank you," she said softly. "I really appreciate that. I've been asking a lot of big questions lately, but I'm still not sure where I stand." Pastor David smiled kindly, his eyes compassionate but steady. "You know, Emily, it's okay to not have all the answers. I've been a pastor for many years, and I still wrestle with some questions myself. I think what matters is the journey, not the destination. And in that journey, there's room for doubt, for searching, and for discovery." Emily let his words sink in. For so long, she had been focused on finding definitive answers. She had wanted something concrete, something that would remove all the uncertainty and make everything clear. But Pastor David's perspective was different. He wasn't offering her an answer to her question about God's existence. Instead, he was reminding her that the act of seeking itself was sacred, that the questions were part of the process. As she resumed her work on the designs, Emily felt a renewed sense of peace. She didn't have to figure everything out right away. She didn't have to rush to find a neatly packaged answer. The journey itself was valuable, and in the act of seeking, she was already growing. Later that week, Emily was walking to the community group when she felt a sudden, unexpected sense of calm. The world around her seemed to be in perfect harmony. The soft rustling of the trees, the distant hum of cars, the laughter of children playing in the park. There was a beauty in the simplicity of the moment, and for the first time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As she walked through the doors of the church for the group meeting, Grace greeted her with a warm smile. "Hey, Emily. How's everything going with the fundraiser?" "It's going well," Emily replied, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "I've been thinking about what Pastor David said to me the other day, and it really stuck with me." Grace raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" Emily paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "He said it's okay to not have all the answers, that the journey itself is what matters. It's not about having everything figured out. It's about the process of seeking, the questions, the growth along the way." Grace's smile widened. "I love that. It's such an important reminder. Sometimes we get so caught up in the idea that we have to have everything sorted out, but the truth is, there's so much beauty in not knowing, in allowing ourselves to explore." Emily nodded, feeling a quiet sense of clarity. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand that. I don't need to have all the answers right now. I just need to keep asking, keep seeking, and trust that the answers will come when they're meant to. The group gathered, and as the evening unfolded, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She was no longer searching for a singular, definitive answer to her question about God. Instead, she was learning to embrace the journey itself, the questions, the doubts, the exploration, and the connection with others who were walking similar paths. As they sat together, sharing stories and thoughts, Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of belonging. She didn't have it all figured out yet, but for the first time in her life, she felt okay with that. There was no rush to find the answers. What mattered was that she was seeking, and in that seeking, she was growing. And as the evening drew to a close, Emily found herself with a renewed sense of hope. The search was far from over, but now, it felt like a journey she was ready to embrace fully, not alone, but with others who shared her questions, her doubts, and her desire to understand. The days continued to pass with a quiet rhythm in Emily's life. She felt a sense of stability that had previously eluded her, a kind of grounding she hadn't known in years. Though her questions about God remained, they no longer felt like a storm threatening to overwhelm her. Instead, they felt like gentle waves, inviting her to ride the tide of uncertainty with patience and trust. One evening, as Emily sat in her small apartment, scrolling through some messages on her phone, she came across an unexpected notification. It was a message from Elon Musk. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been several months since that conversation at the community event, and she hadn't expected to hear from him again. The message was brief, but it left her breathless. "I've been thinking about your question a lot lately, and I'd love to meet again and talk some more. Maybe we can find an answer together. Let me know when you're free." It was one of those rare moments in life when time seemed to stand still. Emily stared at the message, not sure how to respond. She had been navigating so many thoughts and feelings in her own life, about faith, God, and purpose, and the idea of meeting with Elon again felt both exciting and daunting. But she knew this meeting might offer an opportunity to explore the very question that had been at the heart of her journey. Does God exist? The question had been swirling in her mind for months, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of an important breakthrough, one that could change everything. She decided to reply, setting up a meeting for the following week at a quiet cafe downtown. The day of the meeting, Emily arrived early, her nerves buzzing. She had no idea what to expect from this conversation. Was she seeking a definitive answer from Elon, or was she simply hoping for another perspective? She wasn't sure. What she did know was that, for the first time in her life, she was open to whatever the conversation might bring. Elon arrived a few minutes later, looking as composed as ever, but with a warmth in his eyes that made him seem more human, more approachable than she remembered. "Emily, it's good to see you again," he said with a smile. "I've been thinking a lot about your question. It's not an easy one to answer, but I think it's worth trying." They ordered coffee, and as the conversation began, it felt surprisingly natural. Elon spoke about his work with space exploration, artificial intelligence, and the quest to understand the universe. He talked about the vastness of space and the incredible complexity of the human mind, and how both science and philosophy had shaped his views on life, the universe, and existence. But then, as the conversation shifted toward the question that had been at the center of Emily's mind, Elon paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You know, Emily," he began slowly, "I've spent so much of my life trying to understand the nature of the universe, trying to answer questions that seem impossible. But sometimes, I wonder if the answers are less important than the search itself. Maybe the true mystery of life isn't something we can solve, but something we have to experience, something we have to live." Emily listened intently, her mind racing. She had expected Elon, of all people, to offer a more concrete, scientific answer. Instead, he was speaking about the search itself, the uncertainty, the mystery, the beauty of not knowing. "It's like when we explore space," he continued. "We don't know everything. We don't have all the answers about what's out there. But that doesn't mean we stop exploring. We keep going, we keep asking, because that's what moves us forward. That's what gives life meaning." Emily's heart began to race as his words resonated deeply within her. She had spent so long searching for certainty, for a clear-cut answer, and yet, here was Elon. someone who had conquered the unknown in ways that most of the world couldn't even comprehend, saying that the search itself, the journey through uncertainty, was what mattered. Her thoughts spun with a mix of awe and clarity. The answers she had been searching for were never going to be handed to her on a silver platter. They wouldn't arrive in the form of a single revelation or an earth-shattering moment. No, the answers were woven into the process of seeking itself. And that was when it hit her. The search for God is not about arriving at a single point of understanding. It's about embracing the journey, the questions, and the mystery. In that moment, Emily felt a breakthrough. She wasn't going to find all the answers right now. She wasn't meant to. The questions would continue to shape her, to guide her, to open her heart and mind in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. But that was okay. For the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace about the uncertainty she had once feared. She wasn't lost. She was exactly where she needed to be. Elon noticed the shift in her expression. "I can see you're deep in thought. Does that resonate with you?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes slightly misty as she smiled. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. "It really does. I think I've been so focused on finding an answer that I forgot to appreciate the beauty of the search itself." There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of her realization hanging in the air. Elon smiled, as if he knew exactly what she was feeling. "You're not alone in this," he said. "I think everyone is searching for something, even if they don't know what it is. And it's okay to not have all the answers. The questions are what push us forward. And sometimes that's enough." As they continued their conversation, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come to this meeting looking for an answer, but what she had found instead was something even more valuable, a deeper understanding that the search itself was sacred. She wasn't alone in her quest for meaning, and she didn't need to have everything figured out. The answers would come when they were meant to, and in the meantime, she was learning to embrace the mystery. The week following her meeting with Elon was transformative for Emily. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace with her journey. Her search for answers about God, faith, and purpose no longer felt like an urgent quest that needed to be solved immediately. Instead, it felt like a rich, unfolding story, a process that she was meant to experience fully, with all its twists and turns. That Friday, Emily returned to the community group meeting, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She entered the room, and as always, the familiar faces greeted her with warmth. Grace waved from across the room, and Emily made her way over to join her. "How's it going?" Grace asked with a smile. "You seem different tonight. What's on your mind?" Emily paused for a moment, searching for the right words. How could she explain everything that had shifted inside her? She had no grand revelation to share, no sudden, life-changing moment. But something deep within her had changed, something she couldn't quite articulate yet, but something she felt with every fiber of her being. "I think I'm starting to get it," Emily said quietly, her voice filled with wonder. "I've spent so much time looking for an answer, for something concrete. But the answer was never the point. It's the journey that matters. The questions, the uncertainty, the seeking." Grace's eyes softened, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'm so glad to hear that," she said gently. "It's easy to get caught up in thinking that there's one specific answer that will make everything clear, but sometimes the beauty is in living with the questions. The search is a sacred thing. It helps us grow in ways we don't even realize." Emily nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Yeah, I've been so afraid of the uncertainty, of not having everything figured out, but I'm learning that it's okay to just be in the process. I don't need to have it all figured out right now." As the evening went on, Emily shared more of her thoughts with the group. She spoke about her meeting with Elon, about the insights she had gained, and about the peace she had found in embracing the mystery of life. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was more of a gentle shift, a shift that was unfolding bit by bit. Later that evening, as the group closed in prayer, Emily found herself reflecting deeply on everything she had experienced. She didn't have all the answers, and she was okay with that. She had learned that faith was not about certainty, it was about trust. It was about taking steps even when the path wasn't clear, about seeking without knowing what would be found. And in that search, she had come to understand that she was never truly alone. As the prayer ended and the group began to disperse, Grace pulled Emily aside. "You've come a long way, you know," Grace said softly. "I can see the growth in you. You're not just seeking answers anymore. You're living the questions." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I think I've finally realized that the search itself is the answer. It's the living that matters." Grace gave her a gentle hug. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You're going to continue growing, and I'm excited to see where this journey takes you." As Emily stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The world felt vast, full of possibilities, and she didn't need to know everything to appreciate its beauty. She didn't need to have all the answers. The search itself was enough. As she walked home, Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift off her shoulders. She had learned so much about herself, about faith, and about the importance of asking the big questions. But most importantly, she had learned that it was okay to live with uncertainty. In fact, it was in that uncertainty that she found a deeper connection to the world around her, to the people she loved, and to something greater than herself. In the days that followed, Emily continued to explore, to ask, and to seek. She didn't have a clear path in front of her, and that was okay. The beauty of the journey was in the asking, in the searching, and in the small moments of clarity that came along the way. And so, with each step, Emily found herself more open, more willing to embrace the unknown, and more at peace with the mystery that was unfolding before her. She didn't have all the answers, but she no longer needed them. The journey itself was enough. And as Emily continued on her path, she realized that her search for meaning, for connection, and for purpose was just beginning. The questions would continue to come, and with each one, she would grow. And in that growth, she would find the answers she had always been seeking. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?